In all that we do, taking action, getting things done, moving ahead, and making it happen are requirements. But too often, we're guilty of ready, fire, aim. Action comes naturally to most of us, but right actions for our users must be framed by two critical disciplines. First, we must have a clear understanding of exactly why users are experiencing what they're experiencing before we take any actions on their behalf. And then we need to validate any actions we take on their behalf to ensure they work as expected. In this section, we'll see how all the other topics that we've covered, all those principles and methods lead up to the process of deciding, acting, and verifying. We're going to talk about this idea of the DART. And again, DART is an acronym, and we're going to talk through how that works. But first, a little preliminary. Until now, we've been focused on this process of inquiry, of making visible all of these aspects of human-computer actions that otherwise are invisible to you. We've covered several key principles of what are effective user interactions, why and how it's the users that determine all that happens for you and your online endeavors in your business, how it is all invisible, and how you go about uncovering it and assessing it. But once you do all of that, if you understand all those principles and practices, and you've done all that, what do you now do with all that insight, all that new knowledge and user awareness? Well, you must analyze it. You must look at it critically and creatively and decide what to do about it, how you're going to act on it, and then how you're going to retest and tune it to make sure that what you've done works and that you haven't introduced new problems. So combined with the progressive HCI process that we're going to talk about here after we cover DART, this is really the recipe for online excellence. This is how you're going to uncover, incorporate, validate, and continuously improve whatever experience you're putting out there in the world for your users. So let's talk about this acronym. What does this mean? What is this art of the DART? It stands for the following. At first, it means to decide. From all the methods we've reviewed so far, you're going to make a great deal visible that was once hidden. And from those discoveries, you'll decide what the implications are of those findings and then the actions you're going to need to take as a result. That process of deciding what the implications are and what you're going to do about them is hugely essential to making all of this work, to making your users successful and making yourself successful. Second is then acting. Once you make those decisions, once you decide those implications, now you've got to actually go out and implement. You've got to do that with excellence. You've got to put all of those things into action, put them online, put them in front of your users. Of course, once you've done that, put it out there, now you've got to retest. You've got to verify. Did everything that you do work, and did you not incorporate any new problems that you'll have to deal with? And then finally, there's this ongoing process of continuous tuning and implementing. And when we get into the progressive part, we'll cover more of that and we'll learn more about why that is important. Be aware that the actions that you're going to take are going to come in many forms. And what we're going to do is we're going to cover these actions and or samples of these actions, starting with, first of all, the key principles from the core workshop and then the 4 additional principles that are covered in the bonus. These are going to be very specific. These actions that you take are going to be very specific to your systems, your customers, your users. And I can't predict for you what they're going to be, but I can give you some examples of the number of different possibilities that I've run into with my work and my clients. How complex they are, what you'll experience, where you'll uncover all these challenges and opportunities are going to be determined by your users and also by your team and who's going to be responsible for dealing with a lot of these. Now, any of these areas I'm going to show you might be impacted, and there might be many others as well. So be sure you know as you go into this process of the DART, of deciding and acting and retesting, be sure you include those key people. Who's on your team, who's responsible for all of these, because they're going to want to participate in both the decision and the implication process, as well as the action and the retesting. So let's start with the principles that we covered in the core workshop. So starting with narrative. Once you test narrative, some of the actions and implications might be centered on messaging. What are you saying to your users? Or what are you offering your users? What language are you using? Is it consistent with how they live their lives and what happens with them day to day? What about Usable is the navigation that you're providing them, the menus, the layout, the architecture, all of the information and how it's structured. Is it easy for them to find their way around? And all the different aspects of usable. That list of usable could be as long as several slides. So there's a lot behind that. We really can't go into all of those, but be aware there could be a lot of things there. Seamless. What are the entry points that they're going to use? How are they going to move from one section of your online presence to another? Again, what are the calls to action? When you ask them to act on something, can they easily move from that call to action to the next step and the next step and the next step? What copy have you written around that to describe that and make that clear to them? Those might be areas that you're going to have to address and make some decisions about and act on. Useful, of course, is so important. The content you provide, the features and functions that are included in your online presence, whatever your core value proposition is as a business or an endeavor, what is your unique selling proposition, your whole strategy, all of that, how you position yourself, who's your target market, all of that is going to feed into what are all of these different elements that you're going to have to make decisions about, decide implications about, and how you're going to proceed with those. Now, for the 4 items in the bonus, doer. And remember, this whole aspect of the doer is when do they actually reach for whatever it is that you do? What is the initiating event? So how does your overall design support those actions? When it's time for them to go in search of whatever it is you provide, how easy is it for them to find you and engage you? How have you structured your products? What is the pricing that you're offering them? So those are all areas that might be impacted in this DART process. Functional. Again, do the systems work? Are the platforms the highest possible quality? How well does your software perform? What kind of templates are you using? Are you going to have to update those and make some decisions about those? This whole idea of the dance, and again, that's the emotional, cognitive, behavioral aspects of the human user and how they're interacting with you and how they're going to respond to the offers and the actions that you provide them. So there's this overall sense of a gestalt. Does the whole system, everything about it, really help them with that emotional, cognitive, behavioral process? Does it flow smoothly? Does the content support them wanting to engage? Does the message speak to who they are emotionally? Do your offers encourage them to take the right actions and behave how they want to and how you want them to? And then finally, the user dialogue. And what you find with user dialogue could affect anything on this slide, and anything that we're talking about here could be very important in those regards. So these are just some of the examples in this DART process that you may uncover, that you may have to decide the implications about, that your users may reveal to you, that you're then going to have to take some action to improve, to change, to replace, to somehow make better so that all of this is going to function well for your users. Now, the key to turning all of these human-computer dynamics and this whole human-computer interface to your favor, and of course to the benefit of your users as well, starts with an elegant process of revealing the invisible in a systematic way, as we've explored in detail so far in this workshop. But you can't stop there. So many of those positive outcomes that are available to you will be yours if you follow through and act on your findings. Now, I'm not going to go through all this. There's a lot here. This is just a partial list of what you might be able to realize. You might be able to relieve that agony of people simply not responding to what you're doing online. There are all sorts of business outcomes. You can grow sales, increase revenue, get more orders, get more customers, and financially be better off and succeed more. You might get more steady and predictable repeat business. You can reduce your support costs. This is a long list, and there's a lot more depending on you and your customers and what you do. Now, these outcomes and many more, these are only possible by analyzing what you find, determining those implications in the DART process, and then deciding what to do about them. Now, that may seem ridiculously obvious, but I bring this up because I've seen so many individuals and organizations fail at that critical process that's going to prevent them from getting what you see on this slide. Now, the reasons they fail are many, and I'll mention a few here. So, for example, they may not follow through. They may not thoroughly decide what those implications are and act on them. Sometimes they simply don't believe what their users say. They don't take their users seriously, which is really a cardinal sin in all of this. They may let internal politics and opinion and people's own agendas rule the day, and we have all dealt with that, and that's difficult to overcome, but you got to find out how. Sometimes they get stuck in analysis paralysis. They don't act in an agile way. They have trouble making those decisions and deciding those implications and moving on and making improvements and making changes. They may not be objective about the implications of their finding and letting objectivity guide their actions. So you need to be wary of all these distractions and diversions. The informed action that's required here is driven by this whole objective inquiry into how real people in the real world interact with your online presence. And that process is possibly the single most revealing and effective path to solving what might be your biggest operational and business challenges. So to get real people with real needs to participate in the value that you've created for them really requires you to understand how they interact with what you put out there, for you to make decisions about what you learn in that process and then act on them in a rigorous and objective way. That's really what this is all about. If you can become masterful in the art and science of doing that, of that inquiry, of that analysis, and then taking action, you're going to create for yourself a serious enhancement to whatever you do out there now. And not just what you put online, but you're going to enhance your world, you're going to enhance your skills and your value as a professional to your colleagues, to the communities that you work in, to your company, to wherever it is you participate in. You're going to make yourself more valuable and you're going to help those people around you be more successful as well. That's really what this is all about. So you can be the superhero. This is your chance now to take decisive action, to know where the injustice or the crime or the catastrophe is occurring in your human-computer interactions. And you can be that superhero that's going to go out and solve those crimes and bring justice to those users so that they can be successful with whatever you're doing. So from what you observe, you're going to need to apply that ruthless objectivity to figure out those implications. I can't emphasize enough how important those implications are, because those implications are what leads to the action. So the observations that you make of real users with your system is going to have to drive those implications. And they must be informed by systematic, rigorous inquiry, using all of the methods and principles we've covered here, as well as the 4 that are in the bonus. You have to consult with your best minds. You have to include those people in here. So when you conduct your interpretation and your analysis, make sure those people are at the table. Know who can play the devil's advocate, who will tell it like it is, who will ask the tough questions. You know who those people are. Find those realists, find those skeptics, and include them in the process. They are your allies. They may be difficult to work with, but they are your allies. Get clear and thorough on which users those implications pertain to. Get specific on where and when those interactions occurred, and most importantly, articulate why they occurred. And then from that objectivity and the resulting implications, you can then conduct the action and construct the right outcomes and figure out how you're going to implement all of that will lead to better results. Now, finally, as you go through this, as much as possible, you must include your best understanding and knowledge of user experience design. And there's a lot more Mastermind Academy to help you with that. We're not going to cover a lot of those principles here in this workshop, but all those are available to you, and I'll show you how you can get to those and make the most of those. So critical to all this are those ruthlessly objective implications of observed user behavior in interviews. That's really central to what's happening here. So in that regard, with those ruthlessly objective implications, I want to share a brief case study with you. In a recent project that I did with a healthcare client, I evaluated an interactive health screening tool that was designed to measure heart health. It was actually done by a local hospital here in Colorado. This tool was supposed to identify potential risks for heart attack for new users that had never done any assessment like this, and then was designed to direct them to the appropriate resources. That might be a clinic for further screening, or perhaps consult with a nurse, or in the more extreme cases, to actually get to the hospital for some more immediate action. The original goals of the research project were to get more people to respond to the call to action, which was to direct people to engage their cardiac professional and take advantage of the services that the client or the hospital offered. That was the call to action. Originally, the reason they initiated this project was because the level of responses they were seeing were very low, and they wanted to figure out why and fix that and really improve the number of people that were engaging as a result of having taken this heart assessment. So here's what we observed. When we got real users plugged into this heart health tool, the vast majority of them already had some known cardiac medical history, and the assessment tool provided outcomes and recommendations that were actually inconsistent with that patient's or that user's history. So what they were learning from this tool didn't line up with what their doctors and what their medical history was already telling them. So they didn't trust it. They didn't take the recommendations seriously, and therefore they didn't act on the call to action. So for the few true first-time users, and there weren't many of those, the tool actually worked pretty well. But almost none of those people had any real heart health problems. And so the tool was meaningless. Basically, the tool told them they were healthy. So they didn't take any action either. There was no need to. So from all of this, the ruthlessly objective implications that we took away from this based on those observations I just described were, one, the tool was aimed at first-time users, which was the wrong audience, because most of those first-time users were healthy. Secondly, to appeal to the more relevant audience and the much larger audience, the tool had to be redesigned so that users could actually input their own heart history, so that the results that they would get would be consistent with what they already knew about themselves and other tests that they had taken or other health issues that they dealt with. So at the end of the study, the hospital had to face the reality that the tool simply needed redesigning. It wasn't a matter of just making a better call to action. They had to go back and rethink the entire thing. Now that wasn't the goal of the project, and that was a lot more work and a lot more cost. But that was the ruthless aspect of this. They had to face that reality that the tool they had just wasn't going to work for the audience they were targeting it for, and they had to really rethink this. So there's an example of ruthless implications. You've got to be able to see beyond your original goals and your original plans in many cases to be really ruthless and really get to those implications. So the road to success here is never straight and narrow. And there will be twists and turns, and you have to be prepared for that. In this process of determining implications and actions, let me share with you some pointers that are going to help you navigate some of these twists and turns. First of all, be flexible, be creative, be willing, be exploratory. Think outside the box. Stay open to new possibilities and perspectives. Just like that example I just shared with the heart health tool, you've got to be willing to think beyond what your original goals might be. And as I mentioned earlier, include people with the right skills. That might be from the technology side or the design department or marketing or whatever disciplines, but bring those people's best thinking to the table because they'll really help you with those implications. And even beyond that, if they uncover core business issues, don't shy away from those. Sometimes when we do this testing, we talk to users and they just don't get it. They don't need what you're offering. They don't understand what it is. And it really speaks to your core value proposition or your unique selling proposition. And you got to be willing to address that. And in this whole process of moving ahead and really getting the work done, don't try and tackle everything at once. Be willing to conduct your action in phases. And this is all part of this agile process. And we'll cover this more. You got to take this in bite-sized chunks. You got to be willing to phase it and move ahead in a more manageable way. And again, as I mentioned, you have to include key stakeholders. They're the ones that are going to help you make the decisions, and they're also the ones that are ultimately going to have to do a lot of the work required in this whole DART process. Okay, so why is this important? Well, it should be fairly obvious from a lot of what I've already shared here, but let's cover some of these key points. Again, this is where everything comes together. I mean, what's the point of going through all the inquiry and learning all this about all of your users and covering all the principles and practices that we've shared here in this workshop if you're not going to do anything about them? All of that inquiry is a means to an end, and this is the end. And this is putting it all into action, making it all work. It's best to always verify the actions you're taking by validating and retesting. You want to be sure that you've adequately addressed the implications you've created. And you don't want to create new problems. That's not rare for that to happen. You sometimes will do that. You got to make sure that you've covered that. Now, this is central to the next advanced topic on progressive HCI studies, and so we'll talk about that a little bit more. But in order to really be progressive and commit to this for the long term, and that's where companies have the most success, this DART process is essential to making that happen. And of course, ruthless objectivity is so critical. And that's hard. That's not easy to do, but You're going to get to the core challenges and opportunities faster if you stay objective. And again, include those people that have the skills at playing that devil's advocate and really getting to those issues. Don't just rely on people that have a lot invested in the status quo or who are too attached to their own designs. And if that's you, don't trust yourself either. Find other people to challenge you. And again, this is where the toughest discussions and decisions are going to come up. And you may need to face some of those tough ones. You may be out of scope. You may not have the budget. You may challenge your core business assumptions, but that's the reality. You've got to be willing to deal with those when they come up. Whatever powers of persuasion or influence you can bring to the table, you're going to need those in many cases, depending on your team and how you manage all these resources. And action is so obvious. What's the point of all of this if you're not going to act on what you discover and be very clear about what actions are required? So there's a lot you're going to need to know to pull this off. Obviously, this workshop and a lot of the other tools that I provide can help you with this, but the importance of this action phase is the difference between simply knowing what's going on with your users and demonstrating the capacity to do something about it. And I can't emphasize enough the importance of those implications. That's the crux of this whole process. Be courageous, be clear, be ruthless. If you do that well, the actions become much easier. In many cases, they almost are obvious. From the start, you'll need to know and include the right people like we talked about. So don't forget about who's responsible for implementing this. That knowledge of user experience design, knowing the principles, the practices, the tools. We've talked about a lot of them: usable, seamless, useful, functional. And again, the Mastermind Academy can help fill in a lot of the blanks for you there as you go through this. In all the work I've done in user testing and developing and evaluating human-computer interactions, the best results come when I get my clients or when I go through the process of retesting and tuning. You can't stop at just one round. You've got to be willing to iterate. And the more you iterate, the more you retest and reevaluate, the better that this whole process is going to work. As you go through this, over time, this is going to become more ingrained in your organization. It's going to become part of your culture. You're going to develop new skills, new values around doing all of this. And that's really where you begin to realize excellence. So this is a game changer. This is a game changer for your users. It's a game changer for your organization and whatever you put online and whatever your goals happen to be. So with this excellent realized that I talk about, I'm referring to your personal and professional effectiveness. This is your chance to go for it. Whatever your personal and professional aspirations may be, you'll be able to develop a deeper mastery of your art and science and how you choose to be in the world and make a contribution. Your capacity to create something meaningful and useful and get compensated and recognized for it, that's really at the center of how you're going to succeed and move ahead. When you accomplish that, you inevitably earn greater respect and admiration. You experience more inclusion with your colleagues and your entire profession and anybody in the know about any of this. And that ultimately gives you greater power to create the outcomes you deserve and ensure the future security that you want. The capacity to translate insights into specific improvements and advancements over and over and over again, that's the path to excellence. As you take it to the next level, you're going to demonstrate, you're going to model for the people around you. You're going to teach it and encourage it and show it. And that's going to become ingrained in your team and your culture and your business, or however you run your operation. You're going to be able to lead the way, and people are going to learn. They're going to see the outcomes that are possible, and they're going to start to follow, and they're going to start to pick up on what you're doing. It will eventually begin to build its own momentum. I've seen this happen. It doesn't happen overnight, but commitment to it is really essential, and we'll talk more on how that's all going to work. So you want others to share the ownership and the accountability that you experience, and that will further encourage you to be even more committed to doing the right thing for your audience and for your colleagues as well.